Hi, my name is Jenny Devonshire, and welcome to the Pause2Perform podcast, where we talk about all things relating to wellness, what you should take a pause for in your day to optimise your mental and physical health and perform at your peak. So, hi, and welcome to the Pause2Perform podcast with me, Jenny Devonshire. And this week, I am very much looking forward to chatting with Tim Hipgrave. So Tim is a dad and a runner, but not only that, he has spent 25 years plus supporting people to be fitter, more healthy, and more capable to improve their own well-being. Tim has supported thousands of people through work with individuals, teams, and organizations. He is currently Senior Manager for Global Employee Wellbeing, supporting the delivery of Bupa's Global Wellbeing Strategy. So welcome to the podcast, Tim.
Hi Jenny, good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
I'm very much looking forward to this chat. I know you have a lot of knowledge to share. I thought we could start off if you could just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, your journey so far to where you are, and what you do as a health and wellbeing manager.
Yeah, sure. So, a bit about me. I mean, you said already, I'm a dad and a runner and so on. In terms of my career, the whole career has been based around health and well-being. In effect, supporting others to be more well in one form or another, whether it's physically or mentally. I originally started off working in a few different environments, essentially in one-to-one environments. So in PT and fitness, but then I spent a long period of time in effectively health and well-being coaching as a physiologist, running a team of physiologists as well. So I had the opportunity to help and develop and support other, less experienced people in that area of work. I then moved on and had developed a real focus and a real passion for mental health and emotional well-being in particular, positive psychology especially, and that led me to work with organisations and teams of people and organisations as well. And I've spent the last or a number of years now, obviously with my time at Bupa, but also previous to that, working with organisations and leaders in essentially looking at the experience people are having at work, particularly around mental health, some experience around clinical mental health as well as positive psychology. And I guess I spend a lot of my time, and a lot of my time has been spent as a consultant with individuals, with leaders, with teams around looking at how we can improve things for the individual, the team, or the whole organisation. And it's one that continues to really fascinate me.
So because you said like now you work with organizations, was that like a conscious decision because you felt like you could help more people, or was it because you realized that work was a challenge, or is there some other reason behind that?
Yeah, no, good question. I really wanted to have more of an impact at scale. And the idea of working with organisations just really fascinated me. I had lots of experience, and it was a really good experience of sitting in a room talking with another person about how they were doing, and in one form or another, how they could effectively help themselves to improve their state, whether it was their physical state, their mental state, their emotional state, and so on. But I really wanted to have more of an influence, I guess, on environments, and to have more of a sort of, if you like, like a cascade effect of what's the experience like for lots and lots of people, by bringing some of the experience and knowledge that I developed to that organisational context.
So how has kind of the work environment, how have things changed? Have you seen, like, since you've been working within organizations, is it the same challenges or has this changed? And also, I guess, like, I'm from an outside, like, well, working with companies myself, but I feel companies are a lot more aware of, the importance of employee well-being. Have you seen them really sort of walking the walk, or is it a lot of it kind of like a lip service and just doing like tick box exercises rather than getting to like kind of the root of the problems?
Yeah, I think it's changed a lot. So I think I've been working in a focused way over the last probably 10 years with organizations. And I think broadly the context has changed a lot. I think the awareness has changed a lot in terms of what well-being represents, or it's certainly changing a lot more now since COVID. I think, 8-10 years ago, the general approach was typified by perhaps not necessarily tick box, although that was a problem in some ways, but too narrow a view of what well-being is or was seen as. And I think sometimes that's still the case. And I think um, there's a developing, but probably it needs to develop a bit quicker in terms of what our general understanding of what well-being is. So, for example, go back a number of years, well-being only ever meant those things that were very narrowly labelled as well-being. So, like a mindfulness workshop at lunchtime, or a bit of mental health awareness raising, or a resilience workshop, and so on. And while that could have been very good, there was no attention given to the working environment, for example. So I think, fast forward to now, I think there's much more of an awareness that there's more to it than that. I think companies or organisations or the individuals that lead them have got a greater or lesser extent of an idea about what the breadth of well-being is. And what I'm talking about is, the full breadth of how people feel, how they function in their day-to-day life, their day-to-day work, but then also those things like physical well-being, resilience, which previously, when we talked about well-being, that's all we meant. It was just well-being. It was just fitness. It was just your resilience, and we didn't think about any of the other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
People are gradually realizing there's a lot more to the picture than that. So I think, to answer your question about is it a tick box exercise, I think it varies a lot from organisation to organisation. But I think individual people's awareness is of such a level now that organisations haven't got anywhere to hide, because people are really judging their organisations on whether or not you do give me a good experience. And actually, I should be given a reasonably decent experience, and I shouldn't actually be given a toxic work environment to work in. And that's actually not good enough. And people are starting to get to a point where they're not settling for that anymore. So the bar has been raised. So I think that creates positive challenges for organisations that they're starting to get their heads around.
Oh yeah, I think also, because there is this kind of competition for talent now, people, they need to do more for their employees, because otherwise they will find a company that is doing that little bit more. They can't just do nothing and expect. And I think we've talked about this before as well. We were saying, where does the responsibility lie? Because no one can do your health for you. I mean, like, I think you'd be very rich if I could exercise for people, then I would be very rich. But they have to do it. But then there's also this part where the like you say, the environment needs to be non-toxic. So do you think it's like 50-50 between the employee taking care of themselves and the company, or is it a bit more nuanced?
Yeah, good question. I think my gut feel is it's probably 50-50. We're all responsible for creating and influencing the environment we're in, right? So we've all got a certain responsibility there. But then I think within an organisation, it's my, I think a lot of the stress and the demands that people are under often are things to do with the systems and the processes that people use. I think that's a big part of it. The impact of the manager is really significant. We've talked about the extent to which a manager has the ability to support and facilitate a good environment for their team to operate in, for people to simply be themselves, to use their strengths in terms of their knowledge, skills, awareness, previous experience, etc. And I think there's a lot more to be said for just facilitating people, letting people be themselves, rather than constraining them with systems and processes. Obviously, there are different work environments. We've got to ensure safety for people, physically as well as psychologically. But I think there's a big onus on the organisation to provide that psychologically safe working environment, which in practice means not allowing toxic behaviours, encouraging positive behaviours, encouraging social connection and psychological safety. But at the same time, people have got a significant responsibility. I don't know in terms of percentage points really, but people have got a significant responsibility to engage in that environment, and to support that environment as well. It's not all up to the organisation on its own to make everything just perfect for people.
Yeah, it's funny. There's two things that you've made triggered thought for me there. Was first of all was about people's strengths. I've just been reading a book called Principles, and the name, I can't remember his name, but I think he set up Bridgewater. But they were all about people having their strengths, and they had baseball cards of everyone's strengths. And initially they sort of thought, oh, this is making people really vulnerable, but it was all about like, right, so we know they are good at this, and this. So this task
Mm.
we know who to go to. And I
Yeah,
think like that's actually really empowering because it's obviously you're saying I'm not good at this, but that's also okay. We don't have to be good at everything. And then if you can like easily find the best people for each job, then that's a
yeah,
much better way of doing it rather than desperately trying to do something that you're just not suited to.
yeah.
And I think we were having a chat before, and we were saying about well, leadership, managers in general, and how you might be amazing at your job, but you might not be a great manager. But that's the natural progression in a lot of sort of companies.
Yeah.
And what can is it? Do you think that's like a training for managers is a kind of the key for that, or do you think there's something else?
I think it really can be. I think there's probably two
Mm,
things. One is the the awareness and the acceptance
mm,
that everybody's got different strengths, including you as a manager, and you don't need to be in control of everything. You're not going to be an expert of everything, certainly not when you bring all the strengths and knowledge and experience to bear of the people in your team. That's a really special, unique resource, right? Especially when you put it all in combination, all those people and their minds in combination. So I think there's probably some training and awareness raising around that, but the simple awareness is the first thing. And I think training, yes, I'm an enormous advocate of strengths and strengths-based approaches. There's different models that you can follow, etc. But if you do nothing else, just recognise that people have got different strengths and therefore weaknesses. I saw it was a great talk from like an HR leader recently around dyslexic thinking and people who do happen to have an assessment or diagnosis of dyslexia, actually recognizing the strengths that brings with it. And this was really relevant to me because my younger son has just been assessed as having, dyslexia, in where he's, low in terms of his capability in certain areas, as you'd expect, but in other areas he's higher. He's like 98th percentile in vocabulary and conceptual understanding, etc. And for somebody to actually realise what their strengths are, particularly in some of those areas where we tend to see a negative, like dyslexia or neurodiversity, your mind immediately tends initially to go to some sort of disability
yeah.
or deficiency, right? Um, but if somebody can recognise that actually my uniqueness, whatever that looks like, is actually something that can be brought to bear and should be brought to bear, and particularly for a manager, that they've got the opportunity to simply, again, facilitate. It takes a huge amount of stress away. It's great for the individual because they get more recognition for their uniqueness and there's something that they bring that nobody else can. And the manager gets the release of pressure for having to control everything to deliver all the outcomes that they're responsible for, because all they have to do is talk to the person and understand how they can use their strengths, get their perspective based on the strengths that they have, and simply allow that to come to life. Obviously, within the constraints and the deliverables of what they're responsible for. So I think training around that, and if I was going to advocate any sort of training for think of a new manager, it would be something to do with understand the strengths of your team, because that brings with it a lot of that self-awareness and knowledge of and awareness of other people. That if you go from being good at your job to being then put in charge of a group of people who are good at their job, what's the one thing you could give them? That self-awareness would be one of the key things at the top of the list for me. It really would.
I mean, it's funny actually you say about the dyslexia because I was at a networking event a few weeks ago, and one of the women, I think it was her sister-in-law, had got diagnosed with autism,
Mm.
and it was really funny. So she was then saying, the things that she, you can turn that into a positive because she was very like narrow focus, attention to detail, all these things that you could think autism, oh, they can't do some, they're like you say, like a disability, but actually makes them very well suited to certain tasks. And so, yeah, focusing on things on your strengths is like a really positive way forward.
Yeah.
And the other thing I just like made me think about was I was reading another book. I think it's called Trust and Inspire by is it Stephen Covey or Covey? I don't know how to pronounce
Oh,
it, but
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and he was talking about no longer does like the carrot and stick work. It's like trust and inspire. That's what we want from our leadership. So
Yeah.
we're living like with fear that doesn't work anymore, and
Yeah.
people want leadership they want to be led, not managed. And it ties into that thing about micromanaging. We don't want to be managed, we want to be led, and that is a much more positive way to get the best out of people.
Yeah.
And I think that I think again, like, because it's harder to get staff and things like that, I like to think that companies and leadership will try and take that approach more, rather than the kind of, as you said, the stick approach.
Oh yeah,
um,
absolutely.
I thought I'd come back to the positive psychology aspect.
Yeah.
So I know that you've done some training in it. I thought that maybe you could explain to the listeners what it is, if they don't already know, and also like what drew you to get involved or studying it further.
Yeah, sure. So positive psychology is essentially the study of what's positive about humans. It grew out of the work. I mean, initially Martin Seligman
Yeah.
is credited as being the founder of positive psychology, although there are perhaps others that stretch back into the 70s and 60s and beyond who kind of formed the initial roots of the work that he developed. But it's the study of rather than deficits, which is the idea of what traditional psychology is based on, identifying problems and correcting deficits, if you like, in people, is very much the study of what's positive about people. So, positive psychological well-being and the research that surrounds it is centered around things like the place and the impact of purpose, sense of purpose and meaning, the engagement in life, positive relationships, having a sense of being accomplished and developing accomplishment, and so on. The psychological needs kind of comes into it. The need for autonomy in our own lives and having a sense of control in life, and being able to grow is the other kind of key thing. So there's a number of things that come into it. And what really got me interested in it, or the time I really got interested in it, was I was running a clinic. I'd been a physiologist and a health coach, if you like, and run teams, operational and clinical teams, for a number of years, and I kind of struck upon a particular author. It was Barbara Fredrickson, actually, and there was a guy who was in my team who was really into it, and we used to talk a lot about the research and so on. So it kind of became a bedtime reading topic for me. I have my journal articles in my bedside cabinet, and it was really interesting, and it really struck me because when all the by that point I'd had thousands of hours of experience of talking to and spending time with people one-to-one and coaching them, etc. And I think I really latched onto it because one of the things I'd learned in my coaching and behaviour change sort of practice and experience up to that point was, although as much as I probably couldn't put a finger on it, it was that ultimately people will do whatever it is they're going to do. You can give them as much knowledge and expertise and guidance as an expert as you want, but ultimately people will do what they're going to do, and what they choose to do and what they're ready to do, and that depends on their emotionality and their mental state of mind or mental approach, their mindset, their personality, as much as it does anything else. And so read into it loads and loads and loads. Went forwards, did a master's degree in it, and that was around the time that I started working with organisations with my employer at the time, both within the organisation that I was in, but then in terms of providing services to other organisations as well. And I think it resonated with me very strongly, because wherever you go with whatever angle you take, whether it's some of the things I've mentioned already, we talked about strengths, people naturally gravitate towards that. And you find yourself having conversations, whether you're talking about health coaching or talking with a team about resilience, or in a clinical mental health conversation as well. The focus that positive psychological areas and kind of models do is to they're very inspiring for people, and they bring people along in a way that you don't get with approaches that correct deficits in people, as much as that's important and needed sometimes. Positive psychology is very much about bringing out the best, or allowing people to bring out the best in themselves, which is inherently inspiring, and is the reason I've been so passionate about it for so long.
And how do you use it within organisations specifically?
Yeah, sure. So you can be explicit with it, and in my experience, you can be sort of very explicit, or you can be kind of more implicit and nuanced. I think at its very simple level, it's I think I always come back to behaviour change steps. So know, think, and do effectively. So I think at its most simple, level. It's about language and communications. So talking about what really are just intuitive, natural things when you have a conversation about them, but talking about things like meaning and purpose, and actually just threading that into people's everyday awareness. Positive relationships. Isn't it nice to feel socially connected to people? Of course it is. That's a really key area. Being accomplished, these kind of things. So developing them into language is a really key thing. That allows you to do the second thing, which is get people thinking about how do I actually apply this within my work, right? So you can get early adoption of awareness or behavior change before you even go out saying, right, we're going to do some stuff on positive psychology and here's a program. If you get people thinking, it's the same as anything else. If you see something cool like that somebody you follow on Instagram has started talking about, you think, oh, okay, that sounds interesting. Maybe I might try some of that. It's the same thing. So there's that implicit approach, and I think the more explicit approach is with perhaps, for example, learning programs. So I'm responsible for a global program into which we weave some of this stuff in a slightly more explicit way. So asking people, what is your purpose? Talking about social connection more explicitly, talking about mindset more explicitly, etc. And then obviously you can go to very explicit. Right, here's a strengths-based program. Here's a positive psychology-based program. And so, depending on who you're talking to, what the outcome is that you're looking for, and whether or not people are ready to take on board some of the principles you're talking about, right? Because there are people or teams or organisations that, as much as they might get the principles of a big strengths-based program or a positive psychology-based program, in practice, if they're not ready for it, they're not going to do it. So you've got to start at the right point, depending on who it is that you're talking to.
So yeah, I feel like meaningful work seems to be, I see it a lot more, and people like doing things that are in line with your values and this kind of stuff. Is it? So would you? I don't know if it's really something you would want to recommend or not, but if someone's doing something that they don't find meaningful, is the only way to like find another job? Do you think, or can you somehow mold it or find your meaning within it? Is it just not a right fit, or do you think that there's some work that can be done around it?
Yeah, sure. I think there's always different perspectives to take. Right, this kind of a general mindset I'd always go to. I think the key thing is that I think that we've got to recognise that we can't expect every last thing we're going to do in our day to be full of meaning, full of do you know what I mean? Positivity, warmth, etc. Sometimes you just got to get on with stuff that needs to be done, right? So I think it would be a mistake to suggest to people, and I think this is a watch out for organisations actually, that we shouldn't overpromise to people that they should expect to feel a great sense of meaning and connection and purpose and positivity all the time. That's not realistic. That's not life. And I worry sometimes about organisations overpromising to people externally, but also to themselves, that they can just create this perfect environment for employees, because that's not possible. If you get big groups of people together, you're never going to have perfect environments, because that's people aren't like that, quite frankly. But I think that you can help people to understand how to derive meaning from things they're doing. Difficult experiences can be meaningful, or they can become meaningful. That's probably for one. But then I think the other side of it is that helping people to cope with challenging work, difficult circumstances, probably founded on social connection. I think that's a really important thing. I think we should be advocating to people that developing social connection and strong bonds within teams is really important. That will give a good sense of meaning. Social connection gives a sense of meaning, and that can help people be resilient to more or less meaningful work. But also that, yes, it's always worth considering how you get meaning in your life as a whole. We're all good at different things. My job isn't, some of the things I do isn't necessarily the most meaningful all the time. You've got to do those things sometimes, but where else in your life are you getting meaning? What role does your work play? in allowing you to provide something for, you know, other people that you care about? Are there things you do elsewhere in your life that provide you a sense of meaning as well? So I don't think we should just focus on work and say work's got to be this enormous. As much as work's really important, it's not the override, the overwhelming. What am I trying to say? It doesn't give the overwhelming, you know, number of percentage points of where somebody gets meaning from in their life. So we need to see that in its place, rather than, you know, if you don't see meaning in your work, all is lost. You know, we need to just keep it in perspective, I think.
Yeah, that's kind of also like, in general, you can't expect to be happy all the time because you've got to, you need equilibrium. So you need some of the bad stuff to kind of appreciate the good stuff. And I
Yeah,
think, we don't like feeling things that we see as like negative, do we? I always say this to people, we
yeah,
term it sort of negative emotions and good emotions, and it's like I want to feel good all the time, and it's like, well, you can't, and you're also
yeah,
you're labeling it as a negative, but you know emotions are there to tell you something. It's like you haven't dealt with something, or
yeah,
it's just it's if you're, I think I was talking to someone, I think I probably mentioned this on my podcast with someone before, but it's he was doing a meditation retreat, and I was saying, oh, so will you feel like amazing afterwards? And he said, oh, that's not the point. And it was just suddenly, when it's just like, oh, I suddenly get it. It's about being happy or being able to be in whatever the situation is, which I found really interesting. And
yeah.
yeah, so yes, like you say, you can't expect every day at the office to say, wow, this is
Yeah,
so
yeah,
meaningful.
exactly. And you get that, you know, people talk about the hedonic treadmill effect, is if you do some stuff to feel really good, you need to feel like that all the time, and you shouldn't, because that's a danger, because then you always need something bigger and more meaningful and to make you even more happy. But that's not realistic, like you said, emotionally, but there are always ups and downs, there are always peaks and troughs, and sometimes you have to recognize if you're in a bit of a lower point or even a trough, and get help if you need it. But like sometimes there's a bit of acceptance that you need there, that it's not roses all the time, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah, so you touched on social connection then, which I think, yeah, is very important.
Yeah.
What Obviously we've got hybrid working and working from home. How is that impacting on social connection? And like from within an organization, what do you suggest that companies and individuals do to kind of mitigate any negative impact of that and create these kind of strong social connections regardless of the working, well, how they're working?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I think it's so important. And there can be a real, probably two sides to it. There's a threat there. Obviously, people are spending potentially less time around their colleagues, which in some ways has helped improve efficiency, because people are having shorter meeting times, able to be more flexible with their time. They're not spending as much time or energy commuting, etc. Um, Perhaps be able to spend more time with loved ones or family, or friends and so on. So there's that benefit. But at the same time, there is a loss of contact, human contact, potentially, particularly if people get into a rut of not going out of their way. We touched on it, didn't we? Of going out of their way to see people, or if it's not within their routine, that can be a problem. So I think there are benefits, but there are still needs there that companies can support in terms of how they connect, or give opportunities for people to connect. And I think it's important for those to be as organic and natural as possible, and not forced. I think it's team meetings and connection is brilliant. I think it's important to have a space for people to choose to connect with one another informally, as much as it's nice to have a regular sort of team slot in the diary. I think there's an important balance there. We can't coerce people into organising all their social connections, because that's not how it's supposed to work. So I think some structure and some guidance on simple ways that people can connect is really important. And I think just the bit about awareness raising, and I do a lot of work with people in different countries. The bit about awareness raising and communication, I think, is really important. And just simply just advocating that, don't forget, it doesn't matter whether you're introverted or extroverted so much, but just remember that to spend time and invest a little bit of time in people that you care about and that you have a positive relationship with is really important as well. It's important for them. I think when people are on their own, helping people to remember that they can have a really positive impact on other people as well, and that you remembering you in the broadest sense, you are a positive benefit to other people. It shouldn't be another tick on the list to remember that, oh, I've got to talk to people. Don't forget that people will miss you if you're not in contact with them, and that being in contact with somebody might be the best thing that happens to them that day, especially if somebody's really, really struggling as well. So I think helping people to remember that in terms of social connection, there's a benefit you're giving to someone else. It's not another thing you should remember to do. It's, remember others as well. I think that's an important one that can help people just remember that sense of social connection.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way of looking at it, because often, like when in all sorts of spheres, that you won't necessarily do something for yourself, but if you think it's going to be beneficial to someone else, you're more likely to do it. That's a
Yeah.
really nice way to kind of frame it when you're sort of trying to encourage that sort of social connection. And I was just wanted to come back a bit to the positive psychology. I don't know if it's relevant, so we'll find out. But you studied health and well-being physiology and behaviour change,
Yeah.
and then you studied positive psychology afterwards. Did your attitude or approach to behaviour change as a result of the positive psychology, or is it kind of just enhanced it?
Yeah, it certainly enhanced it, but I think it's changed in that what it helped me to realise was that I mentioned a bit about ultimately people are going to do what they're going to do, and I think it helped me to realise that there's more to there's a lot more to be gained from helping a person realise what it is they need to do to be well, essentially, rather than telling them. So I was brought up as, if you like, as a lot of healthcare, fitness, wellbeing practitioners are, rightly, on being an expert. The evidence base. You read hundreds and hundreds of hours, and lots and lots of information. And part of my training originally was to coach, dare I say, coerce people to agreeing to behaviours that were in line with an evidence base. So you've got to exercise this many times a week with this progression, or eat these things, or not eat these things, or sleep this many hours, or blah blah blah, whatever. All of which is right and proper in terms of evidence, but it took no regard really for whether the person was psychologically or physically ready to do those things, or increments to getting there. So a lot of what I do now, I very much come back to are people ready? What's right for the person to take steps forwards to improve their own state, right? So in terms of, what's their level of awareness, what's their level of current engagement in things that might be good for them, or not, but what do they want to choose to do? So when you think about, so going back to the positive psychology, when I really learned the depth and to appreciate personally the importance of, well, before we've got expertise we're going to throw at people, have we considered, what is the purpose that for them today, this year, this decade? What does it mean to them to have good social connections? What does it mean to them to be engaged in whatever it is they're going to choose to do? We need to understand that exists first. And we don't necessarily need to understand it, but the person needs to understand it. And then you can't do anything effective, and the person won't do anything effective and lasting in terms of, once you've got that self-awareness layer first, then you layer on top the expertise, and you allow people to choose. And if people are in the right place, or if and when people are in the right place to say, yes, do you know what? I'm going to exercise 4 times a week. I'm going to follow that progression. I'm going to eat those things, and I'm going to sleep 9 hours a night. Yes, that is connected to my purpose, my sense of engagement. It fits within my relationships and how I want to live my life, and choose how I do all that. Then great. So the positive psychology for me helped me add that basic layer, that foundational layer, which I think relieved a lot of stress for me in terms of the control I felt I needed to exert as an expert to positively impact people, because it became more about understand people and help people understand themselves, rather than just lecture at people and get them to do what they should be doing, quote unquote. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's a bit like say motivational interviewing is a psychology technique you've probably heard of, but for the listeners, it's about helping people, meeting them where they are, and helping them to become ambivalent to change. Because, like you say, you can't tell someone what to do. And I think that also, from what the research I've done into sort of workplace well-being, is again few companies make the mistake of going in and just going like, right, this is what you're having. But if you're not asking the employees what they want or what they need, then
Yeah.
again, they've lost that autonomy, which is so fundamental. And another thing I was going to pick up from that as well is it ties in a bit with I did my acceptance commitment therapy training,
Yeah.
and that's all very much about your values, and so tying in what you're trying to achieve to your values. So if it's sort of like exercise, and then you've got your family is important, like exercise will mean that you've lived better, or you can play with your kids, or all those, so it's much more relevant rather than just being like you say, right, you need to go to the gym 5 times a week. I know you hate it, but you need to. And it's like, well, that's never gonna work. We all know this.
Yeah.
Make that mistake.
Exactly, and it just stresses people out and makes people feel guilty and fail. Even failure shouldn't even be a word necessarily. It's just you're either getting in the direction that you want to go, or you're not. I completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah. And exactly, because I think I was talking to an exercise psychologist, and saying that a lot of people, they know what they should be doing, in air quotes, and you also get people who really hate exercise, like really hate it. They know that they need to do it for their health purposes, but like, how do you help someone? It becomes another stress. It's another thing to worry about because they don't want to do it, but they know they should. So it becomes like another anxiety, and then that's another, that's not helpful at all. So yeah, helping people make small steps and not try and change everything at once. And you don't need to do, like, you don't need to go to the gym 5 times a week. You can still get healthier by making very small changes, can't you? And then building on from there.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah. So I thought I'd come back a bit to the workplace well-being now, or wellness, whichever term you want to use. So when you're working with companies, what's your kind of approach to creating a health and well-being program?
Yeah, sure. So I think the key things are very simple. It's understanding needs is the first thing. Understanding people's needs, which is it's very easy to lose, and I've seen a lot of companies kind of completely miss that step, really. But I think in one form or another, understand the needs. So there's lots of ways of doing that. There's invariably going to be information there, information, data, insights, and so on, whether it's from simple data, about absence and sickness and so on. I think talking to people, getting a good input on what's the kind of things that people need, the things that the things that are causing them problems with well-being as well. I think is really, really key. I think it's you don't necessarily need to have an overriding focus, or there shouldn't be an overriding focus on providing people new stuff or jazzy stuff and so on, if you're not paying attention to things that are helping them solve problems that they've got with their life. We talked about financial well-being, or being able to commute at a reasonable time, or how does your working day look. So there might be simple things to do with people's experience of work that could be addressed in a relatively straightforward way that would have a big impact on well-being, as well as the things you might typically put in a program, quote unquote. So I think part of it comes down to what are people's needs in relation to perhaps a slightly broader understanding of well-being than we've typically used within organisations. So the employee experience, as well as what could be in the program. So what are the needs? I think then taking a reasonable maturity approach as well. I think when you're looking to implement things within a business, or implement changes within a business, there's a lot of people that have got to understand that and get on board with it. Particularly if you're talking about developments or changes that you might like to see in the working environment, but also in terms of programs and the kind of people you're engaging. There will be people at different levels of understanding. So you've got to bring people with you. So it's about doing things, raising people's awareness and doing things in a stepwise approach, rather than throwing a whole load of stuff at people that they may or may not be ready for. I think specifically in relation to a program, it might look like a series of benefits or options, or well-being specific activities that people might like to get involved in. The same things apply. We talk about behaviour change. Traditionally, and I think it's probably still true, that the last people to engage in wellbeing activities sometimes is people who perhaps might benefit from it the most. If they recognise the connection to purpose and social connection, all the rest of it that we talked about, is typically, or perhaps stereotypically, in my experience, it was always men, probably of a certain age or kind of background, who were the last or the most cynical about certain wellbeing activities. So you've just got to do the right thing, raise people's awareness about potential benefits based on what your understanding of their needs is. Otherwise, it won't. People won't engage. And I also think the simple, just showing that you want to find out people's needs and find out what people's challenges are, that is an enormous thing itself, which can actually benefit well-being. As long as you are genuine about it as an organisation or organisational leaders, taking a genuine interest in people, what their challenges are, what their problems are, and probably a bit of authenticness and openness that, okay, great, we are listening, we're trying to take that on board, and showing some sort of demonstrable action, whether it's in a wellbeing program or the comms that you're putting out or the training you're putting in place, or changes that you're trying to implement in terms of the employee experience, showing sincerity and actually some honesty that, okay, we can see these problems, we probably can't solve it all overnight, but we're going to try and we'll keep talking to you. I think that if a company just did that, that can have an enormous amount of power. Whereas if you go in and just give people activities without that sincere approach to improving the working experience overall, you run the risk of increasing cynicism, and potentially damaging well-being. So it's just about having that balance, I think.
Yeah, I think just being heard can be so powerful, can't it? And often it is that. Like I think I said before about going in and just giving people things without asking, and it's almost like they might refuse to do it just out of kind of just because because of that, rather than because you haven't actually listened. That's absolutely true. And do you find when talking to employees about their challenges and things, are they very open about it?
Yeah, I think if you just engage with people in the right way, and there's passive and active ways of doing it. So, a lot of companies will run an engagement survey of one form or another, and that can be a really, really useful source of information. I think I've seen approaches, really, really good approaches to within the organisation. I work within Bupa, to going out and actually getting in front of people and listening to people, whether it's in groups or different forums for doing it, and different companies will have different ways of doing it, depending on their setup. But actually going out of their way just to let people talk to you about what's going on, what's your experience like, what are the problems you have, what are the challenges that you have, outside of a structured question set, which ultimately you set as the organisation. So you kind of set the priorities. But if you let other people talk, it doesn't have to be to everybody, but a good representation of people from different work areas and positions in the workforce, or background, or age, or whatever it might happen to be, that can give you some real gold dust. And you don't have to go too far to identify important themes. You can see the themes crop up by talking to a relatively small proportion of people from different areas who've got probably similar work experience as well. So, and I think that's not to be underestimated. It's just talk to a few people, from in your organisation, and they'll just tell you. They'll tell you stuff. And as long as you as we said, sincerely listen to that, and keep people updated with what you're doing and how you're trying to solve problems, or if you're having problems solving problems, that you'll keep people engaged, and they'll believe in you. They'll believe in you. You've got to make progress. You've got to make demonstrable progress to improve on things that people need improving. But that act of sincerely listening, again, very, very powerful.
Yeah, I was talking to someone working in a similar field, and they were saying that their experience is they go into companies to sort of help within employee well-being, and they're saying a lot of companies don't want to do that, and I think it's because they're worried about what they're going to find out. Like, they know there's a problem, but they don't really want to know. But I think that's very short-sighted, because, like you say, there's gold dust there, and how can you fix the problem without knowing what it is? And you're probably going to waste a lot of time and money on the wrong things, where it's always better just to know, isn't it? Like,
for sure.
yeah. in every
Yeah,
in any situation, really.
absolutely. Yeah, no, I remember working with a law firm a number of years ago now, and I did a bunch of stuff around kind of raising awareness, particularly around leaders of mental health and resilience and well-being and those kind of things. And we were putting in like on-site mental health therapist, counsellor as well, and they had zero. This company had zero reporting of mental health absence. All the other absence, but as far as mental health was concerned, nobody took time off because of mental health. But as soon as the counsellor was put on site, they had they had a day or two a week in clinic, and they had like a 2-month waiting list, because so many people wanted to self-refer. This was the key, that people could self-refer for treatment or talk, some sort of support because they were struggling, and they had this enormous waiting list. And that tells a real story there about what people are prepared to talk to an organisation about or not, or have an avenue for reporting, because there's clearly a lot of distress going on there, right? But there wasn't an avenue to talk about it. Quite the opposite. What people were doing is just completely burying it, and with all sorts of potential negative outcomes, right? So giving people just the right forum for being able to talk and articulate their experience as early as possible can prevent those sorts of experiences for people.
Yeah, and I think, well, maybe like the sort of, I don't know if it's still the case, but people don't want certain things on their file, so
Yeah.
mental health, even though we've come on leaps and bounds, there's still might be a little bit of stigma around there, or you might think, oh, it's going to stop me getting this and a promotion or something like that. So confidentiality, I think, is key, and that self-referral sounds like it was really beneficial in that situation.
Yeah, it was, and I think that still can be an issue. I think when you look at EAP type programs, people still tend to have a perception that the company's going to know, somebody's going to know, and that's a problem. The fact is, it's not that necessarily anybody will know; it's that it's a problem. Obviously, confidentiality is very, very important, and for me, that's where it's so important again for just role modelling from the organisation in terms of comms, but leaders being open and talking about their own fallibilities, their own experiences within life. And it doesn't have to be, you're sharing all your dirty linen in the closet and every last difficult experience you've ever had, but just a simple openness as a manager, as a leader, right from the top of an organization. Just simple openness can unlock so much for people that I think is not realized a lot of the time. I used to, clinical mental health, and I used to triage people on the phone, and people on in a really, really bad way, on with a high level of intentionality around suicide, right? And a lot of that is rooted in not being able to speak to somebody a bit earlier or a lot earlier. And within an organisation, that you hear the phrase the tone set from the top all the time, and it gets trotted out as a bit of a line, but it's really, really true. And that the attitude of a senior leader, or a CEO, or the senior leadership team has a very subtle, or not so subtle, trickle down effect to how more junior leaders in a hierarchy, how they think and how they role model, or whether or not they role model, or what it is they role model. Are you role modeling, performance and things are great and we're resilient and we're tough and we're striving? Great, but what do you role model around? Okay, well, yeah, I've got family too, or I've got issues going on outside of work too. Yes, and this is stuff I'm dealing with as well. Where's the that role modeling of human connection, but role modeling of empathy based on an attitude of care is really significant, and it has a much more significant knock-on effect than people often give it credit for.
Yeah, I think also for things like these well-being interventions as well. They say things like, yeah, again, it has to come from the top. So if you want people to take a lunch break and leave at a reasonable hour and not work, late into the night, and have that work-life balance, you need to do it too, because otherwise people don't feel like they've got permission to. So it is like very important for everything, isn't it, within the workplace?
Yeah, very.
What do you do, or what companies do to ensure that any kind of well-being program is inclusive, so it's accessible for all employees, whether if they've got physical disability, mental health, or any other individual differences? what can companies do?
Yeah, sure. So I think it kind of comes back to what we were saying around, understanding people's needs.
Mm.
Um, and I think, you can make great use of employee advocacy groups, talk to people who you may have connected already. And if you haven't, it's a good idea to have these groups for people to share what what their issues are, what are the problems that they face in regards to their experience of being at work. That's probably the first question, and I think then when you're, so that helps you understand the kind of information that people would benefit from having. How do they want to find out about it? What's the subject that people want to hear more about? What's the experience of work that they'd like to simply to share? It's really powerful for some people simply to be able to have it known that their experience of work is perhaps different to other people's. That is really, really important as well. So, what does that look like? And then I think in terms of actually designing, activities per se, communications activities, whatever it might look like. I think that it's important to again listen to those employees, and some of the time that's going to mean not doing things like you traditionally done them. It might be learning activities, physical access issues. I think companies broadly are tend to do a much better job of, but it's always worth kind of making sure that you are. And I think in terms of getting feedback is really, really important as well. Your approach to engaging people, delivering activities, or looking at developments to the working environment, let's say, it's never a finished job. Continuous listening. You don't have to be changing things all the time, but having some form of ability for people to input to what their experience is like, and just listening to that and taking appropriate action is really important as well. Um, because as we've said, people can see you listening, and that makes a big difference, and you can actually do things that are more and more meaningful for people and useful for people too.
Yeah, I was talking to someone who works within like diversity, inclusivity within the workplace, and it's I think the main reason why it's really important to ask is because there will be things that you haven't considered because you've never experienced it,
Yeah,
and no one expects you to know, but you need to ask. And
yeah,
I think, and also with things like sort of, I think with like neurodiversity and other things like that, people are worried about saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing, but people
mm,
don't mind you asking, and you don't need to
yeah,
have the answers. You just need to find out, and that's completely fine. So
yeah,
yeah, asking the question, always about finding out the needs. I think that's like a key takeaway from
yeah. Really true. Yeah,
today. And I know that you kind of love studying as much as me, and I guess you probably read quite a lot, and find out what's going on in the world of sort of well-being. How do you stay up to date with the latest trends and research in like the health and well-being sphere, or within the health and well-being management?
yeah, sure. So yeah, as you say, reading. There's probably a few particular things where I read a lot from like McKinsey and Josh Bersin and Gallup and things like that. So I think there's a lot of papers out there. There are a lot of papers out there around wellbeing. They get thrown around all the time. So I think you do have to be selective. Um, but select according to your own, your own criteria. Talk to people a lot. To be fair, I find, again, in terms of perspective, I learn as much from talking to talking to others, as we've done, and other people in organisations and so on, as I do from reading research. I think both are really, really important, because it just helps give me a good sense of the other challenges that people are facing, like the real, actual human challenges in working in organisations or with people. I think that's really important too. We talk about social connection, and that's another benefit of it as well. So those are the kind of the two key things. I think conferences are good. Again, you have to be really selective, because it's good that there's loads of information out there, but I think you just got to pick and choose what it is you pay attention to, because you can go down an enormous rabbit hole of great learning, but what is the utility that I'm trying to get from it as a person who works within an organization, or an individual, or just a person in the workforce. Just pick the right information from you, and don't worry about needing to know everything of from this great smorgasbord of really good information. Just be selective.
Yeah, I think that is the problem, isn't it? It's like there's information overload now,
Yeah,
and you kind of becomes a stress because you think, oh, but I've got to read this, I've got this podcast I need to, it's just like
yeah,
it's overwhelming. And it's like, I remember when I was doing my MSc recently, or like last year, you get a journal, and then from that journal, or journal article I should say, you can get like about another 20 or 30 out of it, and then you just
yeah,
think, and then you go to it, and then you say, well, this is taking me off where I was actually, what was useful, but I've just been taken off in this,
yeah,
like, you say, the rabbit hole, and it's just like, oh no, you need to step back and be like, is this actually is this helpful? Is this really
yeah,
what I need to be
yeah,
knowing
yeah.
about?
Don't make learning a stress.
Yeah, exactly. Um, so what's I've got just a couple more questions for you. So the penultimate question, what would you what advice would you give to individuals who want to improve their own health and fitness, or health and well-being, but maybe they don't have access to anything in the workplace?
Yeah, sure. So what I would say is, take control of simple things that you can control, right? That's for one. For two, start with your own self-awareness. You've got a lot more answers about what's important to you and what's realistic for you than you're going to read anywhere else. So don't stress or worry about having to go to the expertise and just copy what the experts say. I think just ask yourself simple questions of, why is it important me to be well in the next 5 minutes, in the next week, in the next year, the next 10 years? Why is it important? Who is that important for? Look at the demands you're under. What are you going through? What are you going to be going through? That you need to be in shape for, or you might need to kind of work on your resilience for, or maybe get support from other people for. I think that's really, really important. And understand your own triggers, but what you're like when things aren't going so well. What can you withstand? What can't you withstand? And what do you do? How do you notice that? How do you let other people around you know about when you're struggling, or what you're like when you're struggling, so that they can just check in with you? Because if you're part of I think of a collective mind of people's social connections. That's a collective mind, and if that collective mind can give you a little bit of a note that, you right? Do we need to do something a little bit different just to take stock here, or are we good? Can we push on even further? It might be a different answer. I think that self-awareness is really, really important. So focus on that. Focus on, answer a few questions for yourself about why you need to be well, what you're doing, what you could control, and then just take simple steps. If you want to make a big plan, great, but do not be stressed if you don't have a big plan. The best plan might be doing 1% more of something, or doing a bit less of something it really isn't very helpful to you. Do the self-awareness, do the self-management first, then go to the expert advice when you're ready to build. I think that's what I try to do for myself, and I think that's what my experience of talking to lots of people in different forms has kind of has told me. So that's what I try and do for myself, if nothing else.
That's excellent advice. And I would say, and don't take your don't go and get Instagram influencers and do their crazy stuff. Keep away from that.
You have an enormous list of great stuff you'll never do.
Yeah, exactly. And also, that's interesting. It made me remember something. I think I saw it in like LinkedIn or something. But this person was saying, like, if you've got like a period of stress, try and schedule some relaxation downtime at the end of it to recover, because we can't always control stress in our lives. But if you can give yourself that time afterwards to kind of rest and recuperate, then that's really a really important thing to do.
For sure.
And I've got one more question, which I ask to everyone. What is one thing that you recommend people take a pause for in their day to improve their mental and physical health and optimize performance?
Yeah, it's a great question. Simple answer for me is do what you just said. It's just pause. Just take a pause. I think when you're taking a pause, it's just a check in with yourself. Be aware of yourself. What's going on? What's not going on? Don't have to try and change it. It's being mindful. Take a mindful moment is basically what I'm saying. But just check in with yourself. Remove yourself from the laptop. Maybe go for a walk and just notice. What's your brain doing? What's your emotions doing? Do you want to be in that space? Would it be nice to be feeling a slightly different space? And just, the answers will come to you about what you need to do right now to manage that. So just listen to that. But if you do nothing else, just pause and just check in with yourself for a minute, and let the rest, let the rest happen, because your brain will tell you what you need.
That's excellent advice. And I do think that that's one thing that we forget to do, don't we? We're busy, and we don't take time just to check in with ourselves and see what we are feeling. And I've got a friend who does in like embodiment, and just saying, so many people, we're stuck in our heads and we don't tune in, and we often do have all the answers. So I love it. Love excellent advice. So I thought, just to finish off, if people want to sort of find out more about you or work with you, where can they find you?
Oh, sure. So people can find me on LinkedIn. It's probably the best place. You can kind of read a little bit more about my history, or contact me via there with any thoughts or queries.
So thank you so much for coming on. That was really informative, and I think the listeners will get a lot from it. I will link to Tim's LinkedIn profile so you can find it easily. So, but other than that, thank you so much for joining me.
Great. Thanks, Jenny. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to the Pause2Perform podcast with me, Jenny Devonshire. If you enjoyed this show, I'd really appreciate it if you could rate, review and subscribe. This helps other people find it, and hopefully I can help more people to improve their mental and physical health and optimise their performance.